Hello everybody, I'm Mary Maguire, Director of Public and Legislative Affairs at AAA Northeast, and we are joining you today with a very exciting and interesting and informative discussion of college counseling and college lending and financial aid. I'm joined in this discussion by my friend and colleague Don Kerr from AAA, who's the Senior Manager of College Lending. Welcome, Don. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, you know what, it's great to have you here because I think, first of all, a lot of people don't even realize that AAA Northeast does college counseling and has an entire department and an expert like you who's devoted to this. What would you like to tell people? What's your message if they don't realize that AAA has this incredible resource?
Just let them know that we're here to help them plan and pay for college every step of the process, from when they're thinking about where they're attending to paying the bill to even afterwards when it's time to start paying that student loan debt. We can help them along every step of the way.
Which is pretty terrific. I think so many people think of AAA in terms of road service and travel and financial services, but they don't realize that a component of those business lines is this whole great college counseling service. So it's so great to have you as a resource. So I have to tell you that financial aid is a subject near and dear to my heart because I have one still in college, two who've already gone through college, and one in graduate school. So we've got our hands full, and we certainly have dealt with the financial aid forms, the famous FAFSA, of course, and all of the other components of financial aid. And in fact, we dealt with it on the secondary school level as well because our kids went to independent schools and we applied for financial aid there. But I think that one thing that really characterizes this issue is that a lot of people do not bother to even consider applying for financial aid because they assume that they simply aren't eligible. What about that, Don?
Yeah, that's one I get all the time. That's one I heard from my neighbor. Don't bother applying. You know, you're not going to get anything. Everybody should apply for financial aid, and everybody will get something. At the very least, you're going to get access to low interest rate loans from the federal government. You can even get access to work-study programs, which are part-time jobs for the kids around the college campus that can help out. But you also may be surprised. Some of the more expensive schools sometimes have larger endowments and they have more money to hand out. And you can sometimes get financial aid from those schools that you think you may not have gotten otherwise. So everybody absolutely should apply for financial aid.
So everyone should apply, even if you are certain that you're not eligible, you should still apply.
Correct. The only exception I would ever make is if your plan is to write the checks to pay the tuition bill in full, then you probably don't need to apply for financial aid. Everybody else absolutely should.
Well, you know, I wish I were one of those people who could do that. I think we all do, because I know you have kids who are applying. Your son is applying as well, right?
Absolutely.
So,
I'm about to go through this myself.
So you'll have even more expertise after that, which is great. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, I know we're talking about college lending, but we actually first applied for financial aid as a family when my three children were in secondary school because they went to a private independent school which offered financial aid. We didn't think we'd get aid either, and we did apply and we did get aid. So is it common that you are able to apply for financial aid on the secondary school level as well?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And it's something you should do. Unlike at the college, there's a well-defined process in different places you can go, from the federal government to the state government to the college themselves. At the secondary level, it's all driven by that school themselves, but they do have financial aid available. There is a process you can apply for. So don't be afraid that I'm not going to send my child to that school because you don't think you can afford it. At least reach out to that school and go through that financial aid process and to see what type of assistance they have for you. It is out there for folks.
Well, you know, I think you just brought up a great point, Don, which is that a lot of times people's fears of being able to pay for something or fears of not receiving financial aid really deter them from applying to the school of their choice. What would you tell parents and students about that?
That you should never let that fear rule your decision. If you have the ability, the grades to get into a school, and that's a place that you want to attend, don't rule it out on cost up front. Later on, after you've gone through the financial aid process, cost may need to be a decision that you weigh. But up front, you should never rule out a school just based on their costs, because you'll be surprised sometimes once you go through the process.
I remember my kids saying at one point, oh, the financial aid application process is so complicated, it's so much work, it's so time consuming, and then I'm not going to get any aid anyway. Is it really worth the effort?
It is. It is. It's not that complicated. It's got a kind of a bad reputation. Historically, the form, when it was on paper, was very complicated. It was, like doing your tax returns. It could be that complicated where you needed an expert. However, there have been so many changes in the last couple of years to streamline the form, put it online with self-help, and even tools that import your tax data directly from the IRS into the forms, that a lot of the complexities that have gained it that reputation are now no longer around. So everybody should definitely fill it out.
Okay, so you've convinced me. You've won me over. I'm applying. So here's my first question. Do I need to have already been admitted to the school that I'm applying for financial aid from before I apply?
You do not. You can apply for a financial aid before you've been into a school, before you've even submitted your application for admissions into that school. You do have to be admitted at that particular school before you'll actually receive the money, but you can apply for aid at any point in time. And it's always a good idea to apply for multiple schools. Having lots of different schools on there sometimes can increase some of your chances for aid, and you have a better chance to compare different awards later down the line.
And hopefully you'll have lots of awards to compare, especially if you've been a good student.
Yes.
And by the way, I should mention something about that. It really behooves parents probably to talk to their children about the difference financially it will make in everyone's life if they are good students getting really good grades and are therefore far more eligible for scholarships and financial aid, correct?
Oh yes, absolutely. So when it comes to financial aid, you can get it for two reasons. One is merit, and number two is based on your financial situation. So what you just talked about is going to fall under that merit category. So somebody with really good academics and good grades can get money during the admissions process just based on their good standing as a student and what they've accomplished over their last 4 years. And that is going to impact, hopefully down the road, less loans that student has to borrow, and that's going to make a big impact on their life after college. So getting those grades now is really going to have some payoff later.
I think it's really an important point because I think when kids are young, they're teenagers, they're in high school, they're not necessarily always thinking about their financial future, although they should be, and some are. And I think if they realized, perhaps, if students realized in high school what kind of a difference financially when it comes to paying back student loans, getting a B plus instead of a B or an A minus instead of a B plus makes to their future, I think it could be very motivating for students.
Oh yeah, I didn't understand that when I was that young as well, and it can make a big difference. Whatever school or college you're looking at, a very general rule of thumb is when you graduate, if your student loan debt is equal to your starting salary, you're going to be okay. So if you know you're going to be over that, sometimes focusing on those good grades and trying to get financial aid and scholarships to offset that so you stay at that 1-to-1 ratio, that's going to have a good impact for you down the road financially.
That's a great rule of thumb. I've never heard that. So if your starting salary is equivalent to the amount of your loan that you need to pay back, you're going to be okay. You're going to be able to pay it back.
Exactly. So if you graduate into a field where you're going to be a starting salary of $50,000 a year, you can afford to have $50,000 in student loan debt that you need to pay back. You'll be financially independent, you'll be okay, and you won't have to worry about it. It's the ones that go 2, 3, and 4 times over that ratio are the ones that I see that are struggling sometimes.
My kids better be making a lot of money then.
That's the whole idea. That's the whole idea.
So let me ask you about the timetable of all of this, Don. So when can I submit a financial aid application if I'm a student?
So that's something they've changed recently as well. Historically, it was January 1st, but they have now moved it up to October 1st. Is when the forms now become available, and you can start filling them out at that point in time. The earlier the better, so you can get out there October and start filling out all your financial aid applications.
Okay, so you can start filling out in October, and what's the deadline for most financial aid applications, or does it vary depending on whether you've applied early decision, early action, regular decision, etc.?
Yeah, there are a lot of varying deadlines you want to pay attention to. Aid comes from 3 sources. Comes from the federal government, the state government, and the college themselves. You always want to abide by the earliest deadline. So the federal government really doesn't have a deadline. It's going to be kind of at the end of the school year, so we don't have to worry about that. The next is going to be a state, and every state can have different deadlines. So you want to research on the FAFSA what your state deadline is, and they list them all out there so you can see what they are. Connecticut is February 15th, Massachusetts is May 1st, New Jersey can be April 15th. So you just want to look around and see what the deadline is.
Okay, so that's important to remember, that depending on what state you're in, you're going to have a different deadline. So if somebody's moving in the course of applying to college or something like that, they have to remember that. You're talking about the state that the school is located in, or is this a statewide deadline?
The state you reside in.
Okay.
You also want to look to see what the school might have for a deadline date. Just because you're ahead of the state deadline date, the school might have sent an earlier date than that. So you can research that at the school's financial aid website and look for what they call a priority deadline date.
Okay.
So once you've researched them, and that could be different for regular admissions and early action and early decision, and they will post what those dates are up there.
Is it generally true that if you apply early decision to college, you're going to have an earlier financial aid deadline?
Yes, the earlier you apply, you'll get an earlier deadline. A lot of schools have moved those dates up as well, which in turn, now you also hear back from those schools earlier about what type of aid you've received to give you more time to weigh your decision.
So I think that's important for parents and students to know, because our first student applied regular decision. Okay, so hearing, in other words, in the spring about whether or not he was admitted. And so there was a later financial aid deadline for him, but my second two children applied early decision, and so they had an early financial aid deadline, and it took us by surprise with child number 2, because we were anticipating the same deadline as we had with my son, who applied regular decision. Right. So.
Yeah, if you get out there, you can start filling out the forms as early as October. You don't have to rush out and get them done October 1st, but have that as a target date, and you should meet all the deadlines that are out there for all these different varying factors as a good rule of thumb.
So what does FAFSA stand for, and is that the main form that everyone uses?
Yep, that's the main form that everybody has to fill out. It's called the free application for financial aid.
And some people call it a headache, right?
Yes.
And it can be, right?
It can be. It can be overwhelming, and I can understand that because there's such a big weight on this. You're doing something for your children who are so important to you, and those forms can determine your financial future as well. So there is a lot of fear associated when you have something so significant on the line for you.
So what if Don Kerr and Mary Maguire have had a really bad week as parents, and our kids have too, or we've just had a really busy month and we have missed the FAFSA deadline? Does that mean it's too late to apply? What should we do in that particular case?
It does not. You should absolutely still fill out the forms and get them done. Just because you've missed the deadline doesn't mean you're not going to get aid. The longer you go past that deadline, the less your chances are of receiving aid, but you still want to get it done. You fill it out a week after the deadline, it probably doesn't really have much of a difference or any significance. If you're doing it a month, 2 months afterwards, there could be. But there are still aid you will get regardless of when you fill it out. So everybody should still fill it out and not panic.
Well, and I think that's great news, certainly, because there's so much involved in applying to college. The applications themselves, the essays, all of the information you have to gather together. And then there's the financial piece of it. And sometimes it's hard to get everything together by the deadline, especially if you're not completely familiar with the deadline. So everybody should apply. And if you miss the deadline, don't despair. Go ahead and apply anyway. And if you're close to the deadline, you're probably going to be okay. So let me ask you this. Isn't part of the problem with applying late, for example, that colleges have a certain amount of money allotted for financial aid, and it's a first come, first serve kind of deal, or is that not correct?
They don't necessarily do it first come, first serve, but they kind of go through funding rounds where they're handing that out, and they're trying to hand it out equitably to everybody. They're looking at all their families and trying to determine what their financial need is and helping the families with the biggest financial need. So if you would qualify based on your situation, you want to try to be there so when they're handing that out, they have the biggest amount to hand out. They have the biggest pile to draw from. Now afterwards, they still have money they're drawing from, but they just may not have as much. So your need is still the same. So missing a deadline it's going to have an effect on the amount of money that school hands out, but it's just not a first come, first serve. If you fill that out and you're the first one to fill out the form, but you don't have a strong financial need, the school's not going to give you the money just because you were the first in line. They're really trying to focus on their families and who's the neediest from that financial perspective.
Okay, that's certainly good to know. So here's an important question. Do I have to reapply for financial aid every single year, or am I all set if I've applied as a freshman and, then am I good for sophomore, junior, and senior year too?
Yes, no, you do have to apply for this every single year. You get to go through this wonderful process of filling out the forms, getting awarded aid, and understanding the whole impact. So set your calendar, put out, every October something out there so it's time to fill it out, but you have to do it for 4 years.
So let me ask you this. If I neglect to apply as a freshman and then I do apply for financial aid as a sophomore, is it harder to get into the pool of financial aid applicants who are getting awards, getting financial aid awards if you start later in the process, if you miss the first year or the first 2 years?
No, if you miss a year, you can certainly apply for it in the subsequent year. It's not going to affect you whatsoever. As long as, again, you're meeting those deadlines that the school has set, the state has set, you can still get what you're entitled to, because, again, the schools are looking at your financial situation, and that's really what they're trying to look at. So if you've missed 1 year, the funds are still there in year 2.
Okay, so again, don't give up if you haven't applied in your first year of college and then you realize you should have. Go ahead and apply as a sophomore, in other words. Okay, so a number of options here, which is great. So how do I apply for financial aid, and what forms do I need to fill out? I know we've talked about the FAFSA, but is there other material, tax material, income statements that you should be getting together?
Yes, so you're going to need your tax returns, W-2 statements, information about assets. So you'll need to gather all that type of stuff so you have a good idea of what your financial picture looks like for everybody in the family. On top of that, the FAFSA is being the main form that every single school is going to want you to fill out. There is an additional form called the CSS profile, which is only asked for at probably about 250 colleges in the U.S. So you want to research the schools you're thinking of applying to, or you can go to thecollegeboard.com and you can see a list of all the colleges that ask for this CSS profile form to be filled out.
So I think we filled out that form. What is the CSS profile?
It is the College Scholarship Search. I often refer to it as the FAFSA on steroids because it's a much more intense form. It's going to ask for multiple years of financial information, and it asks a lot more questions that are not included in the FAFSA form. Good news is, if you have to fill out that form, you're only going to have to do it once, unlike the FAFSA form. Oh. You do the FAFSA every single year. The CSS profile form is generally a freshman year activity, and you never have to do it again.
Oh, that's good news. Now, why do these 250 or so colleges require the CSS form? Why do they require more detailed information?
They're looking at the form to really try to be as equitable as possible, and they don't think the FAFSA form gives them enough information about your true financial picture. So they're trying to make sure they're handing out their money, which also these schools tend to have more money to hand out in financial aid, and they're really trying to be making sure that the families that need it the most are the ones who are getting the most of their money.
I see. So based on what you're saying, it sounds like a good practice might be, while your young students are writing their college essays for their applications, you as a parent might want to be collecting those W-2s, those income statements, those other kinds of financial information that you're going to be needing.
Oh yes, absolutely. Having that stuff prepared when you sit down to fill out these forms is going to save you a lot of aggravation.
Okay, well that's terrific advice. So let me ask you this, Don. What are the most common mistakes that most people tend to make, Don, when they're filling out the FAFSA or getting their financial aid or the other forms together?
So these forms, the biggest thing I see is that these forms are student-based forms. All the questions are geared as if the student is the one sitting down and filling out these forms.
Probably not the case in most cases, right?
Exactly, and neither do I recommend that. I always recommend the parent fill out the forms with the child present. That is a great idea to include them in it. But there are questions, because they're geared towards a student, you always have to make sure as a parent filling them out what you're paying attention to.
That is a great idea, though, because again, students should have an idea of how much this costs and how much the student and his parents or her parents are taking on together, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. The other big thing to pay attention to when filling out the FAFSA is what needs to go into the form as far as your assets and what does not need to go into the form. The FAFSA does have wonderful tools on the side where you can see of things that you need to include. For example, most families, their biggest assets are in their house or in their retirement accounts, the equity they have in their home and everything they've been saving for retirement. Both of those are excluded assets and do not need to be reported on the FAFSA.
That's good to know. I didn't know that, and I've gone through the process. So is there one common mistake that you can point to, something that a lot of people get confused by? Or, I mean, clearly that's probably one of them, but is there anything else?
Yeah, another really good one is a 529 savings plan. A lot of families have tried to save for college. They know how expensive it's going to be, and they're trying to save as much as they can ahead of time. When it goes to fill out the form, a lot of parents will sometimes take that 529 college savings plan and they'll list it as a student asset. And it is not. It should be listed under the parental asset. And it makes a difference because they're weighted differently. Students' income and assets have a heavier weight when it comes to financial aid forms. So you want to make sure if that's a big amount you've been saving that it's listed under the parent side. And that's one I see all the time.
Wow, that's a great piece of advice because, as you said, it really can make a huge difference. So what if I've listened to this Facebook interview and I've had counseling with you? Where do I go if I feel like I still need help filling out these financial aid forms in the various states?
So there's a couple different places you can go on the government level. You can go to studentaid.gov. They have a lot of great online resources. Sometimes individual states may have some in-person centers. In Rhode Island, we have the College Planning Center, Rhode Island, where you can go and schedule an appointment to get some in-person one-on-one assistance.
And the College Planning Center, I think, came out to my kids' school as well and let people know that they were available. And I assume they go out to a lot of schools to let schools know that they are there as a resource?
They do. A lot of these organizations in different states are going out to the high schools. They have outreach programs. They're doing presentations in the schools. They're making sure the families are aware that that's a resource that they can draw upon.
Okay. So along the lines of the 529 that we talked about, what if I as a student or a parent have been saving for college for a long time? Is that going to impact my eligibility for financial aid?
It can. This is what's known as the savings penalty. So it's going to depend how much you save, can depend how much it impacts your financial aid. It's one of those things where you're trying to do the right thing by saving for college, and then if you save a significant amount, it can sometimes come back and affect the amount of aid you get.
It seems so unfair, doesn't it?
It is. It is. But you have to balance it on the other side a little bit too. One of the biggest weights on all these financial aid factors are your wages, what you make on your W-2 statement, your job, your wages you get. That has the biggest weight in the formula. So if you're saving and you've got some nice savings, but it's not significant, it's probably not going to have a huge impact on it. Or if your wages are pretty high, then what you've saved may not matter because your wages have already kind of put you out of the running at some point in time. So you've got to look at all the different factors and consider them. Save as much as you can because at the very end, what I mentioned earlier, it's going to reduce those loans you need to have to borrow.
I was going to say, saving has got to be, even though it's kind of a catch-22, you know, you save a lot and then you don't get as much financial aid, but on the other hand, it's always a good idea to save for college, right?
Right. It's a good idea because, like I said, now you're not going to have to turn to those student loans and now have to look at taking on that debt. So yes, maybe you didn't get some of that free money coming from the college or the other sources, but you've saved, so now your son or daughter is taken care of. That's the positive side to look at it.
Okay. Well, hopefully everybody out there is saving. Some people, of course, you know, it's easier to save, and then others, you know, harder to save. So, of course, everybody's in a different situation, but always good to put some money aside for college, for sure. So, okay, I've now done the application, and what happens next? What can I expect?
So you filled out your financial aid applications. All that information gets sent to all the schools you list on them. They are then in the springtime going to prepare what they call a financial aid award letter. They're going to send out to you as a family everything you're getting in aid on one letter, and it's going to include all the aid you're getting from the federal government, the state government, if any, and then the college themselves. So it's kind of a big time where you can really, for the first time, see out of pocket how much it's going to cost you. You know what the school cost already, you've done your research on that. Now you've got a nice financial aid award letter from every college, and you can understand truly what you're going to have to come up with as a family to pay the rest of that bill.
So I know that that's one of your specialties, that you are expert at looking at financial aid award letters and analyzing them and figuring out which school is offering the best package. So how do you do that? What do you look at? What are the criteria? How do I, looking at a bunch of financial aid award letters, which of course is a good problem to have, how do I make a decision?
You have to look at the letters. Unfortunately, there's no standard format. Every letter from every college might contain the same information, but it's listed completely differently. So when you're looking at the award letters, you want to focus on anything that says scholarship or grant or award. Those are true free money. And those are the things you want to start to add up. And then you want to look at what's on that award. Some schools are going to put loans out there, such as the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Other schools might even throw in what's called a plus loan, which is a loan you have to apply for and qualify afterwards. So you want to separate out the free money from the loan money to get a good idea of how much that college is actually offering you.
So hopefully more free money, more grants, right? And scholarships.
Yes, hopefully. One thing a lot of people aren't aware of, that when you get these award letters and you're comparing them to each other, you can negotiate to a little bit of a degree some of the awards they're giving you. It's not like going into a car dealership. You're not wheeling and dealing on the sticker price of the car. But sometimes if you're comparing like schools that are similar tier, and one school is offering you more free money, but you really want to go to this school, as long as you're asking in the right way, you can go back to that school you want to go to and ask them, for example, that you really appreciate everything they're offering you and you're very thankful, but it's still going to be tough financially for you to attend their school. Is there anything more they can do? Even another $2,000 might be helpful. And you'll be surprised. I've seen families get additional money with a phone call. I've also seen the opposite of that. I've seen families write 10 letters and not get a single dime. So, but it's worth trying. If you don't ask, you're not going to get any additional money. So sometimes you can.
So I think this point about negotiation is a fantastic point, and I think a lot of people wouldn't even think of doing that. Isn't it always better, though, if the student is reaching out? I know you said families. Isn't it better if I, as a student, am reaching out saying, I really want to attend your school, but I need a couple extra $1,000. Can you do it for me?
It can. It can. It all depends on your situation, and as well as there's a lot of factors on the school side. So a good idea is sometimes calling into the financial aid office and asking them, do they have a process to appeal an award? Do they have any preferences? Some schools are going to want to see some things in writing. Other schools would be happy to take an in-person meeting with you. So do your research ahead of time and try to find out what that best way is to ask for that additional money, because some schools like it coming from the student.
So what if I've applied, I've gotten an award, I need an extra $3,000 to make it feasible for me to be able to attend a certain college? What if I've just gotten a set of straight A's, or I just did a great musical performance, or we just won the state championship in soccer? Is that something I should be talking about when I make that follow-up phone call?
Depends on who you're directing it to. So the financial aid office is going to be just kind of looking at your financial situation. If you're referring to merit aid, which is done at the admissions process, sometimes it could be helpful to direct those types of accomplishments towards them and see if you can get any more money.
Okay, so that's an important distinction, need versus merit. Okay. So let me ask you this. How do I, as a student, make myself as financially appealing and attractive to schools as possible in order to earn the most financial aid? Is it all grades, or being a fantastic athlete or a great artist? What are the biggest components, and what are things that students can strive for in order to get aid?
Sure. On the merit side, it's really all based on what I call the ICs: athletics, academics, and demographics. So it doesn't have to be all about I'm the smartest student or I'm the best athlete. Sometimes it can be geographical. For example, colleges down south might be willing to give financial aid to folks from the Northeast, because we have got a great population of schools up here, and it's attractive to them to have somebody from the Northeast come down and attend one of their schools. So research the school and look at the factors that they're handing out aid for, and now you can position yourself and say, well, I don't really have that factor that this school is looking for, and maybe they're not on your list, and now you're going to target a different school that's looking for one of the X that you potentially have. So doing your research on what type of schools can help position you the best for trying to get some of that additional aid.
Should you strive to become a recruited athlete? I mean, some schools recruit and offer scholarships to athletes and some schools do not, correct?
Yeah, that's an art all into itself on marketing yourself as a student athlete. What school should you target? You can do some things in there to maximize the value that you're getting out of that. So if you're fortunate enough to have those skills and abilities, use it to your advantage. Research those schools that are handing out for your particular sport, and then see what you can do to market yourself to those coaches directly ahead of time. They can have influence on the process as well. So there's a lot of things you can kind of do if you're in that situation.
You're probably right, though, Don. I mean, that's probably a whole nother Facebook video, right? The recruited athlete and how you become one.
Absolutely.
That'll be chapter 2. That'll be our next one. So here's an interesting question. What if a student gets scholarship money from the Boy Scouts? I mean, I don't even know if they do scholarships, but from the Town Board of Selectmen, as one of my kids did, or from some other outside entity or organization that gives scholarships that's outside the college. Does that award, that scholarship, then need to be reported to the college, and is it factored into the entire financial aid decision the college makes?
Yes, so any outside financial aid or scholarships that you have been fortunate enough to win, you do need to report those to your school's financial aid office. Depends upon the amount, how much it's going to affect you. If you know it's a $1,000 scholarship, they know about it, it may not affect anything. If you're talking about something significant that you've won, a $25,000 scholarship, that could have a very large impact on what you've received in financial aid from the school. They're going to go through their processes of looking at what type of aid you've been awarded, and they may make some adjustments, whether it's money that school's giving you. If they see you've received it from somewhere outside, they may adjust the money that they're giving you.
Okay, so that's very interesting, and I think it brings up another interesting point, which is there are a number of scholarships out there available, right? I mean, if you're a terrific flute player, for example, there might be a flute scholarship out there, or, in the case of my oldest son, he was a really terrific gardener, and he had entered all sorts of contests, and so there was a scholarship out there, in his case, for giant pumpkin growers. But there are lots of sort of esoteric scholarships out there available. How do students and parents research those other scholarships that might be available?
So I think the best way is to focus on you as the student first. So if you go out and do Google today and just type in scholarships, you're going to get a couple million hits that come back. And it's going to be very overwhelming to sort through that. You should spend a good chunk of your time sitting down and brainstorming and writing things down that makes you unique and qualified for things. So it could be, student from Rhode Island who likes to help out in the soup kitchen for their local church, wants to go on and become a nurse. The more things you list in your scholarship search that are unique about you, the more qualified scholarships you're going to find. Now, the search that was once a million is now going to dwindle down to a couple hundred. There are also things that you should be qualified for. So now, in addition to getting the search more manageable, you've increased your chances of winning that scholarship because you've geared your search to who you are. So it can be anything, things you've done in your past, things that you want to do in your future. There's really no limitation to the searches you can add in there.
I'm glad, Don, that you brought up volunteerism and community work and that type of thing. That can really enhance your chances of getting a scholarship, can it? If you've done any kind of community volunteer work as a student?
Oh yes, absolutely. When they're looking at it, they're looking at everything that's unique about you. And even just having one additional community service function that you're doing for another candidate who does not have it, that can make all the difference in the world and give you that slight edge.
So I have to tell you, I've learned a tremendous amount just sitting here with you for 45 minutes or so. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything that you think it's important for students or parents to know about the financial aid process. Once you've got all those award letters, you've compared, you've done your negotiation, if any, at that point, you decide which package makes the most sense for you?
Yes. The biggest thing I'd like to add is don't make it all about the money. It needs to be a factor, so you need to go through the financial aid process, understand what your financial impacts are going to be over 4 years, but don't make your decision solely on that. Has to be a big part of it, but if you make it solely about the money, unfortunately sometimes it can come back and backfire you on in the end. So consider everything.
Well, I know what you mean, because my youngest got a very nice scholarship at one school, but decided to go to the other school without the scholarship. So you have to be happy with where you're going, where you're spending 4 years, and where you are going to be paying this tuition or perhaps paying back loans. You have to be someplace that really is your favorite place or means the most to you, right? That's important too.
Oh, absolutely. The campus that's right for that student, that's the right fit, is going to make a bigger difference. If it's not, then what you're going to find is they end up transferring, adding on an extra year, and now you're right back to where you started with, and it's more expensive anyways.
Then you're on the 5-year plan, right?
Yes.
Or maybe the 6 or something like that. But so something's more important than money, and the right match and being happy, obviously, on any particular campus or at a particular college, even more important. So, Don, thank you so much for being with us today. Really a terrific discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. So a big thank you to you for joining us. A thank you from Don Kerr, our Senior Manager of College Lending. I'm Mary Maguire, Director of Public and Legislative Affairs at AAA Northeast. We hope you've found this informative. We hope we've been able to answer some of your questions. And you can get more information by visiting us at AAA.com. Good luck, everybody, applying to college.